It has been 9 years since the end of the Russo-Japanese War. During the time between 1905 and 1914, the world powers had been arming themselves as much as they could afford. Each country manufactured thousands of machine guns, mostly based on the Maxim machine gun that I showed you earlier. They also built battleships and battle cruisers based on the new HMS Dreadnought. They also increased the size of their standing armies, except the United Kingdom, which stayed with a all-volunteer professional army. It is now July 28, 1914. World War I. The Great War, the war to end all wars, begins. Or just the next flare-up in the hostilities of the 95 Years' War, after a period of rearmament. Due to the complexity and length of World War I, it lasts over 4 years. I'm going to talk about the sequence of events that led up to its start, and then I'm going to mention a couple of battles so you can get a sense of the carnage brought on by this war and the casualty rates. I will also mention some of the people involved in World War I that play a major role in what will be known as World War II. The reason why war breaks out in 1914 is a result of a lot of dominoes being set up to make sure all the rest fall in order. There was the Triple Alliance, which included Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And then there was the Triple Entente, which included France, Russia, and Great Britain. In 1914, there were treaties between countries that guaranteed military support if one was attacked by any other country. There were other treaties that guaranteed that one country would declare war on another country if another country declared war on it or the other country. It was almost a guarantee for war itself, by treaty. On July 28, 1914, the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, Franz Ferdinand, and his wife Sophie are assassinated by Gavrilo Princip in Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which was a part of Serbia in 1914. The dominoes begin to fall. If you recall from my video on the royal connection, Franz Ferdinand was the nephew of Franz Joseph I, the Emperor of Austria-Hungary. Since Franz Joseph's son and Ferdinand's father had both died, Franz Ferdinand was next in line to be emperor. Therefore, after some diplomatic wrangling and ridiculous demands on Serbia that could not have been made good, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Due to treaty, Russia declares war on Austria-Hungary. And due to treaty, Germany declares war on Russia. And due to treaty, France declares war on Germany and Austria-Hungary. Therefore, Germany declares war on France, and then Russia declares war on Germany. It isn't until Germany invades neutral Belgium during the implementation of the Schleifen to invade France through Belgium and go directly for Paris that the United Kingdom declares war on Germany and Austria-Hungary. Fighting is going on all over Europe. During the war, there were the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary, later joined by Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire, now Turkey and the surrounding areas. And then there were the Allies, which included Serbia, Russia, France and its empire, Belgium, Montenegro, Britain and its empire, including the self-governing colonies of Canada and Australia. In 1915, Italy changed sides, or left the Triple Alliance, and joined the Allies before getting involved. Other Allied nations eventually included Portugal, Japan, Greece, Romania, China, and towards the end of the war, the South American country of Brazil. The United States fought alongside the Allies from 1917 on, but as an associated power with no formal military alliance. It was truly a world war, and this war was fought on a global scale. There were battles and campaigns fought in Eastern Europe, in the Balkans, Italy, Western Europe, North Africa, South Africa, China, as well as the whole Middle East. It was there that the term genocide was coined, when the Ottoman Empire used many ways in an attempt to wipe out the Armenians, including extermination camps and forcing women and children to march over mountains to northern Syria in the wintertime because they were seen as a threat to their empire. 1.5 million Armenian people died. Naval battles were fought everywhere, including the Falkland Islands in the South Atlantic, the North Atlantic, Mediterranean, Black Sea, Baltic Sea, Indian Ocean, and in the Pacific. This war was fought from August of 1914 until November of 1918. That's 4 years and 3 months. There is an amazing YouTube series on World War I that goes into great detail about this war. It's called The Great War with Indy Idell. There's a link in the description below and hopefully right up here. They will take you through this war week by week for all 4+ years of the war. After seeing this series, you'll understand why I have not taken on the daunting task of covering this war in detail. I will go into much more detail once World War II starts. Even so, just to give you an idea of the absolute slaughter suffered by those who fought this war, from late February of 1916, this is a year and a half after the war has begun, until December of 1916, the Battle of Verdun took place in southern France. 10 months of battle. It was supposed to be a turning point battle of the war. The Germans had attacked the French at Verdun. The French, when it was over, had suffered over 600,000 casualties, and the Germans had suffered over 600,000 casualties. That's 1.2 million lives, and there was no territorial gains made by either side. At the same time, the Battle of the Somme in northern France near Amiens, an offensive by the British forces and French forces attacked the German forces. Both sides were in trenches at the start. It was necessary to be in the trenches or to hide in them because of machine guns and artillery. On the first day, July 1st of 1916, there were 57,470 British casualties in one day. The battle lasted until November of 1916. When it was over, the British had suffered 420,000 casualties. The French had suffered over 200,000 casualties. And the Germans, somewhere around 465,000 casualties. And this is in one battle. The British advanced only 7 miles. High casualty rates like this were normal. As I said, the tactics were way behind the technology of warfighting. And there were some amazing war-fighting weapons that were developed during World War I. Most of them are still with us today, but some are deemed illegal internationally because of how horrific they are. One of them was first use of Zeppelins by Germany in bombing raids against England. A total of 52 raids were conducted by the Germans against England. They're no longer used because they're big, slow targets. But the psychological effects on the populace was immense. Never before had a country been attacked from the air. There was also the first use of airplanes in combat. They were first used as observation platforms for artillery and reconnaissance. And then they developed quickly into planes that specialized for different missions, such as fighters, bombers, and reconnaissance. There was the very first extensive use of submarines in combat. Even though the British had designed the first truly effective military submarine, it was the Germans that produced them in large numbers to target both military and cargo ships that were supplying the United Kingdom. The first use of a submersible was actually during the American Revolutionary War. The development of tanks and their first use in attack and supporting infantry. Since crossing the area between the trenches on each side was so deadly, this area between the trenches was known as no man's land. An armed, bulletproof vehicle that could cross the terrain between the trenches, as well as the trenches themselves that the enemy had dug, was developed by the British. The name tank was a code word that was hiding what was being developed. It was disguised as a water tank. Tanks were produced in large numbers by the British and the French. The Germans produced only about 20. Tanks are now a main battlefield weapon produced in the thousands. There was also the first use of poison gas against troops in the open and in the trenches. Both sides used it extensively, but it has been made illegal by international treaty. It's still produced and used today. There were still more, like flamethrowers, which are also illegal to fight wars with. Modern warfare comes of age in World War I. A way of warfare and weapons of war that guarantee the slaughter of millions of lives. There are some historically significant people that fight in or are in leadership positions during the First World War. I feel it's important to list them here because of the roles they play in the 95 Years' War. Douglas MacArthur, the Chief of Staff of the 42nd Infantry Division, served in France from November of 1917 through November of 1918. He was involved with directly commanding troops in the field in the Champagne-Marne offensive, as well as the Battle of San Miguel and the Meuse-Argonne offensive. During his time, he was promoted to colonel and then to brigadier general. He was gassed twice and injured slightly while performing reconnaissance in the final battle. He received many awards and medals for bravery. Then there was George S. Patton. He served in France after being promoted to captain and arriving in England in June of 1917. While in France, he oversaw the training of American troops until he attended tank school in November of 1917. He trained in the French Renault FT light tank. He was promoted to lieutenant colonel and given command of the U.S. 1st Provisional Tank Brigade, which then became the 304th Tank Brigade. During the Meuse-Argonne offensive of September 26th, he was wounded and was recuperating until he was promoted to colonel in the Tank Corps of the U.S. National Army on October 17th. Then there is Adolf Hitler. He served in France and Belgium in the 16th Bavarian Reserve Regiment. In the First Battle of Ypres, his regiment started the battle with 3,600 men, and when it was over, there were only 611 left. After that, he became regimental message runner and received 2 military awards for bravery, an Iron Cross and an Iron Cross First Class. He was injured at the Battle of the Somme in 1916 and then temporarily blinded in a gas attack in October of 1918. He was recovering when Germany surrendered. Winston Churchill. He started the war as First Lord of the Admiralty. He resigned his post in 1915 for his role in the unsuccessful Gallipoli campaign. He returned as an officer on the Western Front for several months, and while at the front, he was a major in the 2nd Battalion Grenadier Guards, and then was promoted to temporary lieutenant colonel for the 6th Battalion of the Royal Scots Fusiliers. Then, in 1917, he was appointed Minister of Munitions, where he was successful in organizing supplies. Vladimir Lenin. Though he was not a combatant, he was the leader of the Russian Revolution in 1917. With German help, Lenin was smuggled into Russia from neutral Switzerland, where he successfully led the Russian Revolution and accepted a separate peace treaty with Germany so that Russia could leave the First World War. Paul von Hindenburg, a Prussian general. Von Hindenburg led the German army to a major success in August of 1914 at the Battle of Tannenberg against Russians on the Eastern Front. He rose to be chief of the general staff of the German army and then becomes one of the most influential political figures in German government after the war. He makes a deal with the devil when he agrees to share power with the previously mentioned Adolf Hitler in 1933. Then there's Joseph Stalin. He was in exile in Siberia throughout the war. When the February Revolution occurred in Russia, he came out of exile and supported Vladimir Lenin and the revolution. While he was never directly involved or participated, he becomes dictator of the Soviet Union in 1929. To be sure, there were countless others. I have chosen these few out of personal interest. To make a very long story short, the Central Powers lose this war. Bulgaria surrenders after the Armistice of Salonika in September of 1918. The Ottomans ended their involvement in World War I with the signing of the Armistice of Mudros in October of 1918. Germany and Austria-Hungary and their involvement with the signing of the Armistice of Compiègne. According to the Armistice, fighting on the Western Front, the last active front, stops at 11 a.m. on the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. And so, hostilities end on November 11th, 1918. The war is over. In my next video, I'll be talking about the immediate post-war period and the Treaty of Versailles. If you remember from my video on the Franco-Prussian War, it was the ceasefire of that war that was signed in Versailles. You may see that the Treaty of Versailles, at least for the French, is payback time for the Treaty of Frankfurt of 1871. The revengeism that I spoke of in my second video pays off, or so it seems. There are amazing similarities, just in reverse. No chance for peace and forgiveness at the end of the war to end all wars. Over 16 million people died fighting this war. And this does not include the estimated 15 million civilians that were killed by the war, or the 50 to 100 million people that died from the Spanish flu epidemic in 1918 and then into 1919. Interestingly, it was named the Spanish flu because censors didn't want people to know that it had made it to the battlefield areas. It might affect morale. Be sure to check out the Great War YouTube series, and then click the subscribe and like button down below, and hit that notification bell so you know when my next video comes out. Most importantly, share this with a friend. Thank you for watching.